We are wrapping up Radio Row Week here on ClaimsOnline.com, and we're brought to you by Munganess St. Louis Acura, Munganess Burkhardt, Alton Toyota, Trice Consulting, Western Illinois University, and Fast Eddie's Bon Air. And joining us now is a man who's familiar with all of those sponsors. He is the H-Man. He is Howard Balzer. What's going on, H?
You brought up, you got me having some memories there when you mentioned Fast Eddie's. Man, it's been a long time since I've been to Fast Eddie's.
H, we got to wrap up the week, and it's on a kind of a down note.
Yeah.
What happened? What is Torry? What's it going to take?
That's the great question. That is the great question. I have some ideas that I'm working on, but the essence of it is this, and we've seen this before with other positions, especially wide receivers. We saw it with edge rushers about a decade and a half ago, where there was a whole bunch of them that were finalists at the same time, and it took a while for any of them to get elected because they were splitting votes, and they were all very close to each other. It happened with offensive linemen several years ago. It happened with Andre Reed, Chris Carter, and Tim Brown for several years back in, I'm trying to remember, about 10 years ago, somewhere in there, when there were a few years where neither of those guys got in. And all three of them were finalists 6 or 7 times before they got in. And so what we have now is a trio of wide receivers that everyone agrees is deserving in Torry, Reggie Wayne, and Andre Johnson. And I'm not going to get into a discussion of who is the better one. I know Rams fans think Holt's the best. Colts fans think Wayne's the best. Houston Texans fans think Andre Johnson's the best.
There's Houston Texan fans?
What's that?
So there's Houston Texan
there are
fans?
Houston Texans fans, yes. And so, to me, that's not the debate. That's not the argument. Because the bottom line is they're all three very close in terms of ability. So then what happens is when they're all finalists together, then who do people vote for when you have your reduction votes? And here's the facts of what happened in that election. All three of those receivers that we just talked about made the initial reduction from 15 to 10 because and Torry and Reggie Wayne didn't make the 10 last year. Andre Johnson did. They all three made it this year. And the discussion, which went on for a pretty long time among those three guys, which was more than an hour and a half, because you talk about them in order, right? And so it ends up being a referendum on all of them being discussed together, basically. And the agreement was they're all deserving of being in the Hall of Fame, and that someone should get in, and that we have to break the logjam. Because in 3 years from today, we will be sitting here, Joe, and talking about Larry Fitzgerald being elected to the Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility. So there's only 2 classes now before that. And you have 3 guys sitting there. You have Steve Smith, who is very deserving, and Anquan Bolden, who have been semifinalists the last 2 years and haven't been finalists yet. So they're waiting for their chance to even get into the final 15. And so I will say this, that when I saw that there was obviously an effort in that reduction vote to move these guys along in the process, I figured that at least one of them was going to get in. I was obviously hopeful it would be Torry, because one of my big arguments was when it's close among 3 guys, you take the guy who's waited the longest, and that's Torry Holt. And I had a lot of guys agreeing with me on that talked after I made my presentation. So I was hopeful that it would be Torry, obviously. I was confident at least one of them would, and so then that sets the stage for another one next year. I was stunned, absolutely flabbergasted, when we read the names of the 5 finalists, and none of those 3 guys moved on. None of them. I'm saying, how could that happen? Well, consider this, and these are the little nuances of the process that are unfortunate but are real. There were 3 pass rushers in the final 15. Dwight Freeney, Jared Allen, and DeMarcus Ware, right? Of those 3 pass rushers, only 2 of them made the final 10. Jared Allen and DeMarcus Ware. So what do you think happened? if there was any splitting of votes among the edge rushers, there were only 2 of them to split votes with. So one of them, DeMarcus Ware, moved on to the Final 5 and got enough votes to be in the Final 5. 3 wide receivers, there was too much split, most likely. And who knows, Torry or one of them, they might have missed the top 5 by 1 or 2 votes. We don't know the answer to that question. But I will state unequivocally, and I can't prove that I'm right on this, if there had been 3 edge rushers in the final 10 and only 2 receivers, I guarantee you one of the receivers would have made it into the 5 and not the edge rusher, because the splitting of votes wouldn't have happened as much as it likely did in this election. So that brings you back to the original question. What do you do about it? I the crazy part, I'm doing a show for Sirius last night. And as we're getting ready to go on the air to interview the Hall of Famers, Bill Polian is on Late Hits on Sirius, talking about the guys who had just been announced. Bill Polian is a selector, which some people think is unfair because he's promoting some guys that he had. Like Reggie Wayne was on the Colts when he was there. And he made the comment when he was asked by the host, Bill Leckus, well, what about these wide receivers? What's going on? And he talked about the votes being split and all that. And he says, and there's a lot of people that think that Torry Holt should have been the first one to go of these guys because he's waited the longest. And the interview said next, he said, and I have no problem with that. And as soon as he said that, you know what I said, Joe? I said, I wish you had said that in the room.
Right.
I wish you had said that when we were talking, and say, hey, you know what? All you guys know that I'm in favor of Reggie Wayne. But as many of you have said, if we're going to pick one, pick the one who's waited the longest. That would have had incredible impact on the rest of the room. But it didn't happen. The other thing that happened is this. Rondé Barber gets in, 6th year of eligibility, right? Albert Lewis, who I believe Rondé Barber couldn't hold his job. But for some reason, Albert Lewis was never a finalist. This was his final year of eligibility. He was never a finalist, and I believe he was a semifinalist like only twice.
When is Torry's final year of eligibility?
When?
Yeah.
This was his 9th year, so he still has 11 more years. But next year will be halfway through his modern day eligibility.
Yeah.
And so, but with Albert Lewis, and there was a lot of, if we don't elect him here, he goes into the abyss, is what we call it, of the seniors pool, right? And so he had a lot of support in that room during the discussions. He made the final 10. And yet Rondé Barber got in with 14 years of eligibility left, and now Albert Lewis is sent to purgatory. And maybe he'll get in someday, but who knows when it'll be. People ask, well, how could he have not been a semifinalist during all that time? And that's what's, we almost can't explain why sometimes guys will fall through the cracks, and then when they're not a semifinalist for several years, they get forgotten about. And then maybe someone starts advocating for a little bit. Joe, I advocated for London Fletcher this year.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to go overboard because of doing Torry, and I don't want people think I'm just going every guy that I think. Well, then Jared Bell sent in a little support letter for London before the vote for the 25, the semifinal. And as soon as he did that, I said, okay, that opens the door for me. So I sent some stuff. London this was his 5th year of eligibility. He had never been a semifinalist. He made the semifinals list. Hopefully that now starts some momentum for him, that he's on people's minds and he keeps getting, and then maybe becomes a finalist one day. But sometimes that's what it takes, someone advocating for a guy. Torry has had the advocacy.
Yeah.
He's been a semifinalist every year he's been eligible. And yet Zach Thomas, who was in his 10th year of eligibility, only 1 more year than Torry, a finalist for the 4th time, just like Torry, but he wasn't a semifinalist every year of his eligibility. He got elected.
Let me talk about the advocating for that. How effective could Kurtz and Isaac and Marshall and Orlando? How much could they help in this process?
Well, I talk about the things they say, but
is there video? Like, could you get video of these guys saying this?
The thing that holds more sway with the voters, there was a couple of years there where Isaac didn't get in, and I had things that Mike Martz would say, the things Dick Vermeil said, the things that Kurt Warner said, all that, and then he didn't get in. But the year after Terrell Owens and Randy Moss were elected, Isaac was the only receiver, and he didn't get in. That stunned me. And he didn't even make the final 10 that year. That stunned me even more. And so I asked a couple selectors, what can I do differently? Is there things that I can do in my presentation that you believe will help with Isaac Wood? And both of them said to me, everyone expects their teammates or their coach to say good things about them. What you need to do is get others, their opponents, to talk about them. And if those opponents can be Hall of Famers, even better. So the next year I got Ty Law, I got Michael Irvin, I got Rod Woodson, and Isaac got elected. I've done that with Torry. I had Ty Law, I had Mike Holmgren saying great things about him. So sometimes it's just the way the vote goes, and especially when it's close. And like I said, you end up splitting votes. Here's one for you, real quick, and I know you have other questions. How many years do you think Lynn Swann was a finalist before he got elected to the Hall of Fame for the Steelers?
He was up there for a while, wasn't he? He was like 15-something years.
So you remember that. A lot of people don't realize it. 14 years he was a finalist. And there was a period of time where he and John Stallworth, his teammate, were finalists together. I think it was about 7 or 8 years that they were both finalists. And guess what? They were splitting votes. And so one year, from what I'm told, Dan Rooney of the Steelers kind of sent a letter to the committee and said, hey, you guys need to decide on, in my mind, Lynn Swann should go in first over John Stallworth. And guess what? That next election, Lynn Swann went in first, and then John Stallworth went in the next year.
Let me, it sucks that Torry's not in there. Torry belongs in the Hall of Fame. When you look at who made the Hall of Fame this year, I think Torry should have made it over them. I will say what's even more criminal, though, is that Devin Hester again. I believe Devin Hester should have been first year, should have been a Hall of Famer. I believe when you look at Hall of Fame, it is for the best of the best, right? There is never a better kick returner than Devin Hester that I've ever seen.
Well, the interesting thing about that is there's been some other kick returners who have been just as good in the past, and other kick returners have been very good, but he was great.
Very good. Yeah, I feel like he was the best. He is, when you talk kick returners, I think it starts with Devin Hester.
Well, and a lot of people believe that. But here's the part of it. It's just why it took Ray Guy until he became a senior to be elected, and why there's only 2 pure kickers in the Hall of Fame. Because what happens is, and I'll tell you something, Devin Hester was presented, I believe he was 3rd or 4th in the order of 15. And he was right before Torry, in fact, because he was listed as a wide receiver instead of what he really is. And so, well, he's listed as a wide receiver kick returner, but he's really not. He played a little bit, but that's
Did he start as a wide receiver, or did he start as a corner, as a defensive back?
No, well, he played a little defensive back, I think, in college, and they wouldn't even try him there.
And then after Torry lit him up on Monday night, then they were like, yeah, this probably won't work.
With the Bears, where they tried a receiver, and that didn't work. But anyway, point being is, the presentation for him was outstanding. The discussion for him was outstanding. And as it proceeded on, I figured this guy's getting in. This guy's getting in because of the momentum and what was being said. Well, then there were another 12 presentations after him. And when you're presenting guys who had tremendous impact on the sport and on the game, who play most every down, as opposed to Devin Hester, who plays, is on the field, 8 times a game. And I think that gets it. When you're making that reduction, you're saying, okay, am I going to vote for Devin Hester? Am I going to vote for Devin Hester, or am I going to vote for Torry Holt, or Reggie Wayne, or Andre Johnson, or Jared Allen, or Albert Lewis, or the 5 that got in? Am I going to vote for him over those guys that were every down players and played at a tremendously high level? And that's what ends up, last year what's interesting is Hester made the final 10. Yeah. This year he didn't.
Oh, he didn't?
No. He didn't make the final 10. And I think that's a big part of it, because he's a special teams guy. It doesn't diminish what special teams guys bring to the game, but they have that impact, but they have it on a comparatively very small number of plays that other players do.
So next year, who gets added to the list? Who gets added first year next year?
The 2 names that I've seen that are the most noteworthy are Julius Peppers and Antonio Gates. And what'll be interesting,
Gates, if you're looking at, Gates would be a threat, I think, to when you look at who's there. Julius Peppers, I don't think is that.
Well, I think the exact opposite, actually.
Okay.
I'm not saying Gates isn't deserving, but he'll be listed as a tight end, but in effect, he's a pass catching tight end. And so, do you vote for him over some of these wide receivers? And as a first time eligible, I don't see that. Julius Peppers, I think, will be a Hall of Famer at some point. He had a tremendous career, but again, does he get in on a first time instead of the two remaining pass rushers, Dwight Freeney and Jared Allen? This next year could be a year like last year, where there were no first-time eligible guys get in, and that is good news for everybody else who's been waiting, because now there's 5 spots. Now I don't know that it's going to be that way, but it wouldn't surprise me. And that's the other part of it this year. You have 2 first-time guys get in, Joe Thomas and Darrell Reeves. That only leaves 3 other spots, which leads me to my solution, to the Hall of Fame conundrum that there is with first-time eligible guys. And if you look at it, Joe, in the last 11 years, I believe it is, out of the modern-day guys being elected, 38% of them are first-time eligible players. That's a big number.
Yeah.
And it keeps guys waiting, and it makes it really tough for those other guys when you have one of those years. So I have an idea that what the Hall of Fame should do is, when you have your vote, you vote from 10 to 5, right? And if in the top 5 there are 2 first-time eligible guys, then add number 6 and 7 to the finals, and then vote up or down, yes or no, on all of them. And you might have a class, so hopefully you'd have a class with 2 more guys than you would. But that makes up for the first-time eligible guys. Gets 2 more guys in, and the other thing it does, Joe, is open up more spots for the next year to get into the final 15 to be discussed. If there's 1 first-time guy, I'm not going to go as high as 3. That would probably be too many to add. But if there's 1 first-time eligible, then you add 1. And obviously, if there's no first-time eligible guys in the top 5, boom, you just wrote on the top 5. And so that limits the number of guys coming back the next year. And I think that would be a great move for the Hall. I've run this by a few people, and everyone I've talked to said they like it. So we'll see where that goes when it gets run up the flag.
How weird was it waking up in your own bed all week to cover a Super Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, it was got to get in the car and drive down. The weird, not the weird part about it, but the reality part about it is when, hey, let's be honest, when you go to the Super Bowl week, there's a lot of work, a lot of hours, but you also enjoy the nights and hanging out and doing this and doing that. And when you're out of town, it's call home, speak to the wife, say, hey, how's everything? Here's what I'm doing tonight, and I'll probably get home too late for me to call again. Now, when I leave in the morning, it's what time are you going to be home tonight? That's the big difference. That's the big difference. What time are you going to be home? She's been pretty good, but I certainly haven't had any real late nights. As you other night when you're trying to get me to come over and party after what was that, Monday night?
That was Monday night. I know, it's not just like one friend's in town for the week. Howard, you got 100 friends in town for the week.
True. She's been good about it, but it's kind of a weird vibe when it's in the town where you are.
You didn't bring. I figured you would have brought her to Radio Row. Well, she's a veteran of Radio
Row.
Row.
About it. She's just going to get a day pass, and I said, well, I could, but when I get here at 10 in the morning, are you just going to be wanting to hang around all day? And she's not. She has a bad back and all that. And then of course she said, well, I can go around and shop. And I said, well, that's a good reason not to bring it.
It'll end up costing you as much as an out-of-town Super Bowl.
Yeah, probably.
H, good catching up with you, man. Next year in Vegas, it'll be you and Torry sitting across on that Friday, and we'll talk it out.
However we get it done, and other guys have said to me, yeah, we're working on some things. We got to break this wide receiver log jam. Well, no kidding. It just seems to happen with receivers a lot, and it's only going to continue to happen with the way these guys put up numbers.
He's Howard Balzer. H, thanks for joining us here to wrap up Radio Row.
At Western Illinois University, leathernecks don't just blend in. Our purple stands out. Our students are innovative, creative, and resilient. At WIU, there's limitless potential, with campuses in Macomb, the Quad Cities, and online. Visit wiu.edu/potential to become a leatherneck and get an education that stands out.